Thank you, Grant. Hearing you talk about the invention of exile, I realized that, the first novel was about someone who was stuck in Mexico and couldn't get to his family, and now I'm writing a book about someone who does a lot of movement. So anyway, just for theme, that's kind of interesting. Let's see. First, I just want to say thank you for coming out this evening. I was talking with Pauline the other day about how many amazing things there are to do in this city. And the fact that you're here to hear me talk about dance about 100 years ago is really wonderful. So also thank you to the American Library in Paris for having me, and to the De Groot Foundation for making this wonderful fellowship possible, and to Clydette and Charles, who are traveling but I know are here in spirit. And to everybody at the library, you've all been so extremely helpful. So a little bit about my background in Paris, with Paris before I begin. I first came to Paris as an undergrad. I was recently ending a ballet career, and it was here that I really took the time and had time to read and explore, and fell in love with literature as I was saying goodbye to dance in a way. And I had my first inklings that maybe I could be a writer. So to be back here in that capacity, working on a novel about dance, is extremely meaningful to me and very rewarding. So what am I working on? I'm working on a novel inspired by the life and times of Loie Fuller, a turn-of-the-century American modern dance pioneer who found fame in Paris in the 1890s. And the working title of the novel is called A Question of Illumination, and the reasoning will become apparent as I talk more about her and read from the book. So I think the best way to just start to show you a bit of who she is and what she did is to read from the beginning of the book. Now, this is the first time I'm doing this. I think this is where the novel is going to start. When I get to the end, in however many months or year, it may completely change, but so this is the beginning. It began in stillness and dark, then a flash of light as she rose, and with one flourish, a fluid downward sweep of her arms, the silk billowed wide and white, unfurling, cutting curves into the blackness, turning red, amber, then orange. She was a flicker, a flame, a fire, a great work of immolation, her body disappearing as she spun, a little waltzing step, only a glimpse of her calves, ankles, the low-heeled dancing shoes peeping out as she paused to point, arch back, and let the fabric free. Draped from her arms, shoulders, it swirled around her, she the fulcrum as the shapes formed. Wings were they, or a flower petal? Now a double helix, a coil of colors, red, blue, purple, a whirl of a dream, a reverie. The audience members held a collective breath as she spun, silk pulsating as it caught the air, buoyed up on the currents her turning body created. Then there were gasps that bled into murmurs, a soft rumble beneath the piano's trills. Women leaned forward in their seats. Some raised a hand to neck or chest, the impulse of protection. Others reached for a husband's wrist or thigh, something to hold on to, a counterbalance to the commotion made by all that light and color. Men smiled in delight, mouths half open as incroyable sprang to lips on instinct. The plush seats cried as people shifted, careening first left, then right, vying for a better view. Along the promenades, the ladies of the night thrust their waists against the balustrade, drawn to the transformation by the same force that led to their own destruction. Bar maidens flanked the prostitutes, peering over shoulders, hands entwined and kneading with eagerness to catch a glimpse. Porters snuck away from their lobby posts to stand with the ushers at the center aisle's end. The toilette attendants emerged from their mirrored realms to peer through the orchestra doors, left open and offering a sliver of a view. Backstage, the electricians yielded their iron lights, awaiting her signals, a foot stamp, a wave of hand, to switch to red, then overlap with blue or fade into violet, mauve, moving towards crimson. The electric bulbs shone bright and hot as the men rotated the colors in quick succession, clanging the glass discs against the iron frames. For 3 weeks prior, the posters painted the city. They were pinned to sides of buildings, sometimes 10 lined in a row like a daisy chain along a blank facade. The great Charest lithographs captured her essence, urgency in the bold brushstrokes of orange and red that curved across a black background like enamel depicting the tumult of her swirling silks. Her carrot hair fanned out to echo the flow of fabric, her head thrown back as if in ecstasy. Her image seemed to shout or cry out with all the desire and need and force of her body, the outline of which was visible beneath the drape and fall of her garments. Her arms held aloft, grace in their placement, freedom in their abandon, in the natural forward thrust of them as if she were about to cast off the silks she wore, heedless and exasperated. Those who stopped their hurried footsteps, drawn to the image like an icon everywhere, wondered at her. Who was she, this dervish? A kind of nymph prancing along the scaffolding? She was splashed across billboards, hovering over pedestrians before Au Printemps. She beckoned from behind the glinting glass of shop windows on the Rue Debussy, Rue Saint-André-des-Arts, and Rue Mouffetard. Her image curved around kiosks and rolled through streets as men pulled handcarts of posters advertising her performances. To pedestrians, she seemed to emerge from hansom cabs' hoods like Athena out of the head of Zeus. She peered around the backsides of the omnibus and was next at corners, then crossed boulevards, disappearing behind fruit carts only to reappear alongside trucks or trolleys. Her image intermittent, like the staccato tick of a flip book incarnate. The tobacconists were filled with stacks of billets, some left crumpled and strewn in the crevice of cobblestones. Men, gripped by aphisomania, ripped the posters off street walls to claim her as their own. She hung above public urinals while different men curved into themselves at the sight, more suggestion of her thigh and swell of her breasts. She'd fought her to get her name on the billing. No, the manager told her at first. She threatened to withdraw, break the contract, and with a flounce, turn and take her trunks, her 18 electricians, and her mother back to New York. We'll see what can be done, he'd said. The next day, a shipment of 500 posters arrived. Folie Bergère, La Loie Fuller. The matter was settled. So that's the opening, I believe. And so now, who was this dervish that was painted all over Paris at one time? One critic writing about her could not believe that we'd even have to ask this question. He says, what mark has been left? This is in 1903, when she's definitely at the height of her fame. What mark has been left by the great dancers of former generations? Taglioni, Fanny Elsler, others? None at all. Something will, however, remain to recall the memory of Loie Fuller. So what does remain to recall the memory of Loie Fuller? Many of us might be familiar with the French vintage poster depicting her, the image that I just described. But really few beyond people in dance history circles know who this woman actually was. And I was just fascinated by the idea that she was this sort of impresario and so well known 100 years ago, pretty much the most famous dancer in the world, and now not a lot of people know who she is, and she's been relegated to a refrigerator magnet. This is one of the souvenirs that you see a lot around Paris, but this is her, Folie Bergère, La Loie Fuller. So who was she? She was one of the founding three mothers of American modern dance, along with Ruth St. Denis and Isadora Duncan, who Fuller was a mentor to in Paris. Fuller herself was originally from a suburb of Chicago, Fullersburg, and she began as a child actress, as many of these women did, and went on to perform in various traveling troupes and vaudeville, and did some skirt dancing. And as the story goes, in the way that she invented what is known as the serpentine dance, which is this kind of genre of dance with the swirling, was that it was by accident and necessity. She was quick to think on her feet. As she describes in her autobiography, she was in need of a costume for a dancing part in a popular theater production of the time called Quack MD. She found a long silk skirt, which she wore and danced in, but the fabric was so long that she started to trip over it. And so she began to pick up her skirts and twirl around, and somebody in the audience exclaimed, "Oh, it's a butterfly." Later, she began to experiment, and she writes in her autobiography, "Golden reflections played in the folds of sparkling silk, and in this light, my body was vaguely revealed in shadowy contour. This was a moment of intense emotion. I realized I was in the presence of a great discovery, one which was destined to open the path which I have since followed." Her autobiography has been like that throughout, and it's quite interesting. So she went on to enhance this kind of dance by extending her arms with wands and draping herself with even more luminescent silks. And as she danced, she used her arms to swirl around and manipulate the fabrics into shapes. So you would see a lily or an orchid or the image of a fire. And the other important thing is that she invented stage lighting techniques and the colored gelatins that covered the lights, so that as she danced and as the silks billowed, the electricians would project the lights onto her, and what you would see is what many called a luminous dancing fairy. So she took her show on the road, and she came to Paris for many reasons, but one of the reasons was because a friend and supporter told her that the audiences and the sort of art milieu that was happening in Paris at the turn of the century was, they would appreciate her aesthetic, and they did. Her first performance at the Folies Bergère was in 1892, and she was an overnight sensation. France crowned her La Louie, and I like to say she was something of the Beyonce of her generation. She was very much an impresario. Her image was everywhere, which I tried to describe. Les affiches, the posters, but also in tchotchkes and purses, lampshades and lamp bases. Her name was on silk scarves and in figurines. And the other important thing that was happening at the time was the Dreyfus affair. So people were discussing, have you seen La Louie? What do you think of the Dreyfus affair? I mean, these are the things that you have these two spectacles kind of going, I know, political drama and spectacle, and then you have this entertainment. So lighting. One more thing is that this is very important. She inspired many of the leading artists of the day, from Rodin and Mallarmé and Toulouse-Lautrec to many of others that I will talk about in a moment. But the thing about the lighting inventions that we have to remember is that electricity had just been invented. So this was incredible for people to see. They had never seen, the idea of we have nightlife because of electricity, right? But they had never seen light used in quite this way. She placed the arc lamps, which is what were used then as stage lighting, in the wings at different points. Some were high up, some were a little lower, and then she created a glass bottom on the stage so that she could be lit from underneath. And this allowed her to do so many different things and to create so many different images. And she was sort of obsessed. She was as obsessed with light and illumination as she was with color. And again, she created and patented color gelatins and ways to mix colors. And she was something of a color theorist, writing, again, this is from her autobiography. Color so pervades everything that the whole universe is busy producing it, everywhere and in everything. The day will come when man will know how to employ them so delightfully that it will be hard to conceive how he could have lived so long in the darkness in which he dwells today. Well, she employed them pretty well. So the other thing that she did was she made the Folies Bergère a respectable place to go for people. She really single-handedly transformed the audiences, and instead of just working class men, the aristocracy began to come, along with the middle classes and women and children. And then, of course, the artists that I mentioned before, and they felt her dances, from what they looked like to the sort of vertiginous thrill of seeing them, the emotional and physical and kinesthetic response to them seemed to embody many of their ideas, from Art Nouveau with its curved lines to symbolism, in which painters and poets sought to represent and produce emotion through new uses of language and color. So from Rodin to Mallarmé, Toulouse-Lautrec, and the stained glass makers even, Lalique, Gallet, Tiffany, she was something of a muse. Émile Gallet wrote that he was inspired to seek new colorings by seeing the beautiful light effects invented by Loie Fuller. The Lumiere brothers filmed her. She befriended the Curies because she was interested in using their newfound luminescent element, radium, in her costumes. And actually, there's one anecdote where she was in her studio and it blew up, and she singed her eyebrows off. So she was also a close friend of Flammarion, the astronomer, who shared an interest in color and believed, this is a big theory at the time, that color could affect mood and emotion. She's very good friends with Rodin. Now, Loie Fuller was not an educated woman. Really, when she came to Paris, this was the first time she ever stepped into a museum. But Rodin thought she was a woman of genius, which is saying a lot. And it just so happens that there is a wonderful exhibit at the Musée Rodin right now called Rodin et la Danse, and it features Loie Fuller, Isadora Duncan, and Ruth St. Denis. And just one little side, it's great, you should go see it, but one little side note is it opened on April 7th, which is the day that I arrived, and I really didn't know that this was going on. And when you're writing a book and nobody's asked you to do it and you have no idea what you're doing, you kind of look for every justification possible that it should exist. And so I kind of latched onto that. Okay, so Mallarmé, the symbolist poet, felt her dances were poems. In his divagations, he wrote a piece about Loie Fuller called The Fundamentals of Ballet. And he said, about Loie Fuller, insofar as she spreads around her the fabrics, she then brings back to her person, through the actions of dance, everything has been said in articles, some of which are poems. And also, Toulouse-Lautrec created this wonderful poster, or laissez-fiche of her, and he sprinkled it with gold dust, so it was even more illuminated. And as I said, the Cheret lithographs, and there are many, many others. Yeats, in his poem 1919, wrote about her. And then, of course, Art Nouveau. Her billowing silks and the shapes matched the curved, sinuous lines and designs of Art Nouveau. And she really was, she didn't think, I'm going to go do that. She was just had the luck of being in the right place at the right time, and she was a very ambitious person, and artists, when they came to see her, she embodied all of the things. When you think about Art Nouveau, the building down the street that's so beautiful, that's Art Nouveau, and those curves and lines mirror what Loie Fuller did. Again, the symbolist poets and painters that were trying to use language and colors to convey emotion, and felt her dances really complemented and fulfilled some of their ideas. And again, these are all new things. We're used to this, but at that time, to think of light and color in this way was new, revolutionary. So anyway, all of these artists have their poems and their sculptures and their concrete works of art, and dance is ephemeral, and so all Loie has is the magnet. She had such an enormous impact when we think about the fact that modern dance was just beginning at this time, and now it's an entirely, it's a relatively still new art form, and it's something that was created by women. Although I must say that there is a New York-based dancer called Jody Sperling and her company Time Lapse Dance, which recreates Loie Fuller's dances, and it's quite something to see. But I'm more interested in the novel. What I'm trying to do is really place my characters and Loie Fuller back into that time period. And see, not only how it was an inspiration for artists of the day that I mentioned, but also for, commonplace women, especially at a time when there were so many enormous cultural changes happening for women. Literally, like moving out of the home, out into the world. You could go out unescorted. The corsets were coming off. They were going to cafes and dance halls. They were performing. These new dances were being performed, and it's just interesting. I was very interested in how they think about, or how they began to think about, themselves in this new modern world, because things were also changing so fast in terms of inventions and movement. Meaning the city was being transformed by the car, the bus, the steam engine train, the telegraph, electricity. So the pace of life is moving faster and faster. And so some of my characters are going to be the people in the audience watching and experiencing some of Loie Fuller and what she did and how that moves on into their life. And I was going to read from some of that, but I don't have enough time and I want to get to some other interesting points. So I'm just going to keep moving on. Just a little note about how American modern dance happened, what, again, related to some of these things that were happening in women's lives and how culture was being transformed. So a lot of, again, I mentioned that the three mothers of American modern dance are Loie Fuller, Ruth St. Denis, and Isadora Duncan, who, again, Fuller mentored while in Paris. They were all basically self-made American women who came to Paris to perform and found in the city artistic and cultural freedom. There's a wonderful book called Where She Danced by Elizabeth Kendall. I think it's out of print, but if you're interested in this, it's a great book. But modern dance stems from some of the ideas and practices going on that were related to women in the progressive era in America, namely new health and dress reforms and the physical culture movement of the time, which I like to think of is analogous to our wellness movement and, the cult of yoga and Pilates and organic eating. And so there was a big concern at this time about the health of American women. For many reasons. And so corsets were loosened and women began to wear shirt waists, freer clothing, riding a bicycle, and new forms of social dance became very popular. A new exercise system called Delsartism became a craze. And these were aesthetic exercises developed by a Frenchman for actors, which attached emotions to movement. So all three, Fuller, St. Denis, Duncan, took Delsart classes. They performed in vaudeville and they did skirt dancing. And this gave them sort of a space to think about dance as an art form. And they were very ambitious and they didn't want to be chorus girls. So they started to develop their own solo performances. And then they all formed dance schools. And Martha Graham actually was trained somewhat by Ruth St. Denis. So that's a very condensed little history of modern dance. There's many more facets and things to discuss, but that just gives you a little bit of the time period and what was happening and how I'm interested in that time period and how it relates to just women of the time overall. So in doing research here, I was just realizing, wow, France had a lot to contribute to the advent of modern dance with Delsart, the Frenchman, and then also Paris, where all three women came. And it was, here where there was this wonderful audience for cabaret and dance halls. And there were something like 300 cabarets and dance halls in Paris in 1892. So you had a lot of places to perform. And then, you can trace a line from Loie Fuller, Isadora Duncan, Ruth St. Denis to Josephine Baker on to Martha Graham, and further down the line to people like Pina Bausch and some of the choreographers I'm going to mention whose works are being performed in Paris this spring. I have time to share some of my research finds. Okay, yes. Okay, so let's see. In addition to having too many café crèmes and pain au chocolat, I've been following the footsteps of Loie Fuller and my characters. And the first stop after the library here and researching an excellent collection, I found so many wonderful books here. I went to the Folies Bergère. This is my first Sunday. Now, the only way that you can see the theater is by buying a ticket to a performance. So I got a matinee ticket to Hairspray, the musical. And I tried to say hairspray in French, hairspray. And it was just the weirdest experience to see this crazy American musical en français. It was very funny. But to walk into the theater was, after having read about it and trying to envision it, it was really quite something. It's, of course, I think it's definitely lost its former glory. The walls are painted this weird aquamarine color. It's kind of gaudy, but, you see the chandeliers and the gold, and mirrors are everywhere, and there's this beautiful, elegant staircase, and there's a lot of arcades and then little private divans and tables where you can sit. And there are these two golden horses that are placed upstairs along the promenade. And I kept, asking, can I go here? Things are roped off, and I kept trying to get behind things to see. And anyway, and I tried to imagine that great Monet painting of the bar girl at the Folies Bergère, and you see the reflection in the mirror, and it's like people are lined up 3 deep to the bar, and it just looks like such an interesting world of glamour and splendor. And then I went to the Palais Garnier to see sort of the opposite extreme of what it is to go to the theater, and that too was just mind-blowing. I had been before, but I did a tour this time, and the tour guide said that the way that the theater was built was that it was supposed to mirror, it was supposed to be an architectural crescendo. So as you go up, it just gets more and more grand, and certainly was. And so it's interesting, standing in both of those lobbies, is you look around and you realize, oh, okay, this is just as much of a performance to be in here, to look around, as it is to see the performance. And actually, at the Palais Garnier, you can buy a ticket without a view of the stage. Like, the whole point was just, okay, well, I'll just go, but, they were busy doing other things. I went to the Musée d'Orsay, and I went to their library that had an entire box full of Loie Fuller materials, which was a huge find for me. I saw pictures that I had never seen before, some of the lamps that were mentioned in some of my research, but I actually got to see the lamps. Oh, this is interesting. I learned about the etymology of vaudeville in a history book on vaudeville, and it comes from the French phrase, obviously, called vaudeville, which they were songs composed in the 15th century in valleys, or vaux, near the town of Vire in Normandy. So it goes from vaudeville to vaudeville. Oh, this is another interesting thing. So I've, been interested in movement and technology, and how technology was changing the pace of daily life and people's physical response, and how the body moved through space at this time with all of these new changes going on, especially in a modern city. And I found this wonderful book called Art Nouveau in Fin de Siècle France, Politics, Psychology, and Style, which discusses how in the urban metropolis, its inhabitants faced a relentless barrage of sensory excitation and lived at an accelerated pace, which of course we all know because we all live in cities, and you're in Paris. But at the time, still, if you think about all the enormous changes, that's a lot on, for one body to take. And the neurologist Charcot, the French famous neurologist, named this new disease neurasthenia. And one of his treatments was hypnotism. But also, he discovered that using colored gels or the colored gelatins or discs would help patients and help change their moods. So red produced joy and pleasure, blue was sadness, and yellow was panic and fear. Not that he wanted that to happen to his patients, but I just found this so fascinating that, here you have Loie Fuller, a dancer on the one hand, and then Charcot, and medical doctor and neurologist on the other, and these ideas about color are kind of circulating through the time period. And also, of course, you think of the Impressionists and their use of color and all of the ways that color is being used at this time period. And again, for us, it's not so new, but for them, it was really a revolutionary thing. And then not expecting this to have any relation to what I was researching, just because I really like Klimt, I went to the Atelier Lumiere exhibit. And then when I walked in, I was like, oh my God, of course. You just stand there and you're sort of bathed in color and light, and you're inside a Klimt painting, whether it's, the Golden Woman or the Kiss. And I thought, oh, all right, well, this is what, audience members might experience. So I have a little itinerary for you to do if you are so interested, which is go to see the Rodin et la Danse exhibit, and then go to the Klimt exhibit at the Atelier Lumieres, because in the Rodin exhibit there is a little footage of Loie Fuller, and when you see it now, it's like, oh, it's not that exciting, but like then it was, oh my God, nobody had ever seen anything like this. And then go to the Atelier Lumiere. Let's see, one other thing. Other things I'm thinking about, how women moved around the city in those cumbersome dresses and skirts. They didn't have athleisure then. I've been looking at women's magazines of the time period, and learning that they really helped. Those women's magazines really helped create the idea of the modern woman. I've been reading about the salons in France, which were very much a women's domain. Loie Fuller performed at a lot of these, and I just thought that was interesting. And there's going to be a salon scene in the novel. It might be sort of at the end where all the characters come together. I'm still working on it. I don't know. Thinking a lot about Americans in Paris, and Abigail, the librarian here, gave me this wonderful book that listed the street names and then all of the famous notable Americans that lived on these streets and what they did. And Loie Fuller is there, so that was very interesting. And finally, I found this poem that is on your seats in the book about Toulouse-Lautrec that mentions Loie Fuller. And it's very poignant. The thing that I was excited about it's from 1980, so somebody remembered her. The poet is Richard Howard, and the title of the poem is "Famed Dancer Dies of Phosphorus Poisoning." And Loie Fuller did die of cancer. I mean, the Curies warned her about the use of radium, but she was hell-bent on using it. She really was attached to her art and this idea of illumination. So, one of the themes that I've been thinking about is how art consumes us, and how, whether you're the reader or the writer or the spectator or the dancer or the supporter, or, how it transforms our lives and consumes us. And I think this is that fact, sort of, her wanting to use radium just sort of underscores that fact. And so I just want to read a little, the last segment of the poem, but the rest of it is quite good. So it's a letter to the Curies asking if she can use radium. And so she says, "Yet, what if light itself could move, could dance? The very darkness would be visible. As I gather, you have found the way our costumes and our limbs themselves might be made luminous, without depending on the placement of a lamp or two off stage. Endued with the substance I hear you have named by happy inspiration radium. We'd have no further need of phosphorus, which blackens in no time on human skin. They say your newfound final element generates a light within itself and would inspire, were you to let me have the merest feather touch of such a thing. a freedom unsuspected by the world of illusion which we artists live within. I do not ask for charity, madame, only your presence, which I know would make the soul of kindness the body of kindness too. Come see my dances, come see me, and if you judge my craving worthy of my craft, I know you will be generous. My warm respects to your husband, and to you my hopes, L. Fuller, or as they call me here, La Loie. So thank you. So questions? The Electric Fairy? Yes, I've read that. Yeah. Am I is that the right translation? Electricity? I mean, it's funny. I think a lot of people have this experience where they see the images of her and they don't realize, oh, that's her, or this was an actual person performing and dancing, and I can't open this water. Oh, okay. Got it. Sorry. Possibly, but what I do know about where she lived is that she performed so much at the Folies Bergère that the theater director cut out a little space and created an apartment for her to stay because she would get so drenched in sweat, and to leave the theater she would get cold and sick, and she was performing constantly. So she lived at the Folies Bergère for a while. I mean, she had many different stage names, as a lot of these women did. You know, nobody like Lola Montez, that was not her original name, you know. Even Ruth St. Denis, I think, was something else. And Isadora Duncan may have been Isadora. I have to go back and look. But anyway, yes. That's the next thing is, well, I went to the library at the Musée d'Orsay. Then I have to go to, I still have time left, so I still have to go to the national libraries, which require a lot of information to go in. And then the Museum of Decorative Arts, because they have a lot of objects. And then they have the posters, so I have to do that. So those are, yeah. And then walking around and going to visit these sites that she was a part of. Yes. That's very interesting. I mean, I would hope, I've read some books that I love use images for really a profound effect. Like Sebald uses photographs in his books, and I've seen other writers do that. I don't know. I don't think so. I think I'd like to try to use the words to describe as best as I can, and then maybe that would make people want to go look up images or yeah. I don't know, a lot of biographies have been written about her. I mean, certainly essays I would love to write, but I think the thing that I'm interested in terms of, why I want to write this as a fiction, which is a little bit of why I wanted to write my first novel as a fiction, which is also based on a true story, is that with a novel, you're telling a story or bringing somebody into people's lives and emotions, and literature can give you a portrait of a time period in a way where you're talking about characters and how events of a time affect an individual person. And I think that's my draw towards the fiction. But there's been a lot of great nonfiction, written about her. So, but no, I do write nonfiction about dance. I was a dance critic for a while, but this particular book, I do want it to be a novel because, again, I want my idea, if it works, is that I kind of want the dance, which is the swirls of fabric, to be the different elements of the story and the different characters, and Loie Fuller's the center. So we'll see if that works. Yes. I know. I was realizing I don't know if everybody knows what skirt dance is. So it's not the can, but it was a type of dance that was performed in cabaret halls and saloons in America, and it was widely known. I mean, it was basically, it was like really risque to like lift your skirts to show your ankles at all at that time. So you'd have these chorus girls, and they would do these little dances, and they'd lift the skirts and show their ankles and put and the knees, ooh, and this was, but when you think about this as a way that women could move and then they could become more inventive, and then they think, oh, I don't want to be a chorus girl, I want to be the star, so what can I do? And then they, it just sort of builds from there. But it was a very popular dance that was performed. Yes. Yes, I did, and I was like, "Oh, there's a film about her." But there is, and it's actually uh I it was like in the States for like a week, and I rushed to the theater, and I somehow got the dates wrong, but I have a friend who was actually my cousin gave me the film, so I did see it. Now the story is nothing like what I'm doing, but yes, I mean, and I would actually, that's Jodie Sperling, Time Lapse Dance. She's the one who does it, and actually the filming is beautiful. So if it's called La Danseuse, so it's I think that's the best part of the film. I hope I don't want to offend anybody, but I didn't. The storyline was a little odd, but the dancing filmed was just, it was beautiful. It gives you a sense of what it was like to see her. Well, I know. I mean, I have little bits. I have a vague sense of what I want, and I have this idea of a scene of the salon at the end, and all the characters that I'm introducing are gonna be there in some way, and I'm finding about out right now, who they are, what they're doing. Like one is an American cabaret dancer who started skirt dancing, and she finds herself in Paris, and she's trying to make a name for herself, and she's in the shadow of Loie Fuller. Because that's the other thing. Loie Fuller didn't perform alone at the Folies Bergère. She was part of a review or vaudeville review. So there were other acts going on. There was a lot of ballet. There was cabaret, skirt dancing. There were people breathing, fire swallowers and sharpshooters and acrobatics. And, when she first came here, she wanted to perform at the opera, which is the Ballet Garnier. And then she went to the Folies Bergère, and she was with all these like other crazy acts. So I'm so fascinated by that behind the scenes world. So one of the characters is that. Another one is I didn't get to read from it. Another one is a upper class French woman who's going to the Folies Bergère for the first time and is sort of appalled but transfixed by what she's seeing. And so these are women's stories, and they're going to unite and collide, and different things are going to happen. And then there's this salon, which I'm very interested in about. So yes. Oh, that's very nice to hear that you're interested. Yes, it's my name, vanessamanko.com. But right now, it's all about my first book, so I've got to hurry up and update it. But yes, so. Well, this is very, I know, I knew that question was coming. Well, actually, she was married, and she had a disastrous affair, and she had affairs with men and women, and she was actually a noted lesbian at sort of the end of her life. Um, so, yeah. That's very interesting. So, I've, I've been thinking a lot about, like, okay, why am I writing this book? It's not just because I love Loie Fuller. I love dance. Dance is a huge part of my life. So I have a couple of things about that. One is that, when I stopped dancing, it was a huge loss, and I went through kind of an identity crisis because it was my whole life, and then I found literature, and for a long time I just sort of like pushed dance away, and I was like, well, I'm just not that anymore. And then I realized, well, that was silly, because it's what sort of made me, and it's how I think about the world. And I had a dance teacher or somebody say to me, you know, you'll always be a dancer. You will always approach the world through movement in one way or another. And so I kind of came back to dance. I started writing about dance, and then I got into fiction. And then more recently, I've been taking dance class again, which is very interesting. Thank you. My mind thinks I can still do what I used to be able to do, and then my body tries it, and it's like, whoa, I can't. But there's, I think, a part of me that's sad that I gave it up. Meaning, not the ballet, but what if I had kept dancing? And I wrote an essay about seeing Pina Bausch here for the first time in Paris, seeing The Rite of Spring, and then 20 years later, seeing it again in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And, I was watching it the second time and going, oh, what if I didn't stop dancing? Maybe I'd be a modern dancer. And I don't know, perhaps like writing about dance and movement is a way to reclaim that dancer self in some way. Anyway, because I have so many friends who went from ballet to modern and are still performing. Because as a modern dancer, your life as a modern dancer is prolonged. Yeah. No, I was working with a question of illumination, which is actually a part of her autobiography. It was part of a sentence that struck me because it relates to some of the other things that are going to happen with the other characters. But I will keep that in mind as well, because I believe me, titles of novels change all the time. You should have seen some of the first titles of my first book, but anyway. Yeah, I'm gonna. What I'd like to do is, and I haven't started that yet, is sort of paint a picture of her relations and interactions with them as well. So Rodin will have a cameo. At least I think right now. I'll give him that. I don't know. No. She was right up there along with those other dancers, except hers was more of a performance and a spectacle and something really to go see, and sort of this new thing instead of just a kind of chorus girl or one of those. Exactly. Yeah. There's if I can find it, it's of Jane Avril, Loie. Loie, yes. Oh, yeah. That's this gold one. And there are others, and many others too did posters of her. I mean, it's kind of amazing to see the different renditions. Right here. I don't know if you can see some of these here, and then and I have another book downstairs if you want to come to the office, and more here. This is a beautiful one. It's very small, but if you'd like to come up and take a look at the book is here, and this is all about Art Nouveau. I just want to finish with one thing, which is about the dance that's going on right now. So at the Paris Opera, at the Bastille, Sasha Waltz, she's a German choreographer, again of dance theater, which is a form of dance that's kind of vignettes, and it includes text and movement, and she's doing Romeo and Juliet, staging it on the Paris Opera, and then also the Belgian choreographer Anne Teresa, de Keursmaker, is they're performing some of her works at the Palais Garnier, and that's all happening in the next couple of weeks. So these are sort of direct descendants of Loie Fuller. So if you want to go see some really good modern dance, those are two very good recommendations. So anyway, but thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share this with you.